My dad left me a voicemail. It said, plain as day, don't bother coming to the family reunion. We're cutting ties. That was it. No emotion, no build-up. Just a verbal door slam. I stared at my phone for a second, then sent back a single-word reply, understood. No drama. No punctuation. I didn't even hesitate. Then, without a word to anyone, I removed myself from the family business loan. Quietly, efficiently. No announcement. Just one less name on the dotted line. About a day and a half later, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. 78 missed calls from Mom, a flood of frantic emails from Dad, and one furious voicemail from their accountant that started with, "We need to talk." Funny thing, I actually noticed Dad's missed call right as I was about to shut down my laptop for the night. We weren't the kind of family that chatted every day, so a random call meant something was up. I hit play on the voicemail and let it run on speaker while I packed up my stuff, only half listening at first. Don't come to the family reunion. We're breaking up. My hand froze halfway through zipping up my laptop bag. I stood still, just staring at the wall for a second. 7 words delivered with all the warmth of a business memo. His voice was flat, almost mechanical. Like a judge reading a verdict. I played it again, just to make sure I'd heard right. Don't come to the family reunion. We're breaking up. There was no mistaking it. I stood there, stunned, while those words echoed in my head like the aftershock of a slammed door. It felt less like a personal message and more like a subscription cancellation. I let the phone fall back onto the desk and dropped into my chair, trying to wrap my head around what the hell had just happened. What exactly did breaking up mean? Was he talking about our family? The business? Both? Neither? I didn't know. This reunion had been talked up for months. It was supposed to be a fresh start, the first time in years all of us would be under one roof. A shot at pretending, at least for a weekend, that we were a halfway functional family. I picked up my phone again, my thumbs hovering over the screen. I ran through about a dozen responses in my head, each one a little more pissed off than the last. But in the end, I just typed one word. Okay. No punctuation. No follow-up. I put the phone down and leaned back, already thinking about what this meant. If he wanted to end things, so be it. I wasn't about to grovel for an explanation. But if he thought he could just erase me from the picture like I was nothing, well, that wasn't going to fly. I reached down into the bottom drawer and pulled out the heavy leather ledger we used for the family business loan. It was old school and formal, with neat black signatures, mine right there next to my parents'. Years of shared risk and sweat all captured in ink. I traced my name with my finger, feeling the weight of what that page used to mean. Then, slow and steady, I crossed it out. Watching the pen drag through the paper felt like more than just ink, it was a clean, physical break. I closed the book and shoved it back in the drawer. The solid thunk it made when it landed was the only sound in the room. Later that night, I called my lawyer. Told him I wanted out of everything. I wasn't going to let my father play hardball with my future. I'd learned the rules of this game from him and I was ready to play. The next morning I got to work. Canceled my flight. Deleted the reunion date off my calendar. Then I wrote a short, no-nonsense email to my parents confirming I was stepping away from the business. I asked for a full financial audit. No emotion. No small talk. Just cold, professional language. Like a guy cutting loose from a bad investment. Within 36 hours, my phone went nuts. Missed calls stacked up, 78 from Mom alone. Angela, my sister, tried too. Even Dad reached out a few times. I skimmed through the texts and voicemails, most of them a mess of panic. His accountant, a guy who always rubbed me the wrong way, left a tense message that barely hit his nerves. "Jeffrey, we need to talk. Now." I leaned back in my chair and let a slow smile creep in. I'd given them a head start. I didn't go scorched earth right away. But the storm was here now and I wasn't feeling particularly generous. Ignoring them felt good. It felt right. I wasn't about to stick around just to get stung. My dad wanted a clean break? Fine. I'd make it cleaner than he ever expected. By the third day, the messages had changed. The confusion was gone, replaced by full-blown desperation. Mom's voicemails were tear-soaked and frantic, one long breathless plea after another. Angela took a softer angle, sending worried texts that tiptoed around the issue. "Hey Jeffrey, not sure what's going on, but I'm sure it's just a big misunderstanding. Can we talk?" I didn't reply. Angela meant well, but I knew my dad. If he said we were done, he meant it. This wasn't a slip-up. It was a decision. Then came the 4th day. I got an email from the bank that oversees the family business account. I opened it with a sinking feeling, ready for whatever fresh disaster they'd cooked up. What I saw stopped me cold. My dad had tried quietly to move all the money into a new account under just his name. He was also in the process of dissolving the original LLC. Basically, he was trying to cut me out completely and permanently. The only thing that stopped him was a paperwork glitch. My name was still on some of the legal filings, so the bank flagged it. That was the final straw. He didn't just want to separate. He wanted me gone. Erased. He probably thought I'd be too hurt or stunned to do anything. What he didn't realize was that he'd just handed me the perfect reason to fight back. I took a deep breath, then dialed my lawyer again. This time, the conversation was longer. Heavier. When we hung up, the wheels were already turning and I wasn't just walking away from a loan anymore. The following morning, I gathered every scrap of documentation I had on the family business, contracts, tax returns, old emails, financial statements, you name it. I spread everything across my dining table and started building a case, piece by piece. Every shady transaction, every questionable withdrawal, every creative expense my dad had slipped past the radar, I highlighted it all. Years of frustration poured into that stack like fuel on a fire. By the time I finished, I was staring at a thick file that could sink a small company. First, I filed a formal complaint with the bank and had all our shared accounts frozen pending a full-blown audit. Then I sent off a report to the IRS attaching the most damning pages of evidence I had, stuff that practically begged for a tax fraud investigation. I had no idea if they'd bite, but I was more than ready to find out. And just to twist the knife a little further, I forwarded the entire packet to my dad's biggest client, a family friend who'd known us since we were kids. A guy who definitely wouldn't want his name mixed up in something that smelled like embezzlement. If my dad wanted to go to war, then he was gonna feel every shot, every wound, every damn crater. That night, just as I was sinking into the couch, my phone buzzed again. It was Angela. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, my thumb hovering. Then I answered. Jeffrey, she said, her voice soft, almost like she was unsure I'd even pick up. I could picture her curled up on her couch, probably with a blanket over her legs and her hands fidgeting like they always did when she was anxious. Yeah? I said, guarded. I know you're upset. And I don't blame you. But can we talk? Just the two of us? I hesitated. She didn't deserve to be dragged into the crossfire. She'd always been the one trying to hold the pieces together, long after the rest of us stopped pretending we cared. Okay, I said finally. Tomorrow. We met the next day at this little cafe on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just the same place we used to haunt in college when all we could afford were refills and stale bagels. She was already there, hands wrapped around a mug of something hot, eyes flicking toward the door like she wasn't sure I'd show. When I walked in, she gave me this tight, half-hearted smile like she was trying to be hopeful but couldn't quite sell it. We sat there in silence for a while before she leaned in and broke it. Jeffrey, what's going on? She asked quietly, glancing around like someone might overhear. Dad's spiraling. Mom's in tears. They think you're trying to destroy everything. I took a sip of my coffee, slow and deliberate, while I figured out how much to say. She deserved honesty, but I didn't want to bury her in the mess. They tried to cut me out, I said flatly. Dad's been moving money into accounts I didn't even know existed. He started dissolving the LLC without telling me. I'm just making sure I don't get left holding the bag. Her face shifted, confusion giving way to disbelief. No, she said, shaking her head. That can't be right. He wouldn't just, there has to be a misunderstanding. I slid a slim folder across the table. Nothing too overwhelming, just enough to prove my point. Bank transfers, sketchy invoices, a couple of emails where Dad asked the accountant to speed things along. She flipped through the pages slowly, her face draining of color. Oh my God, she whispered. This is a lot. Jeffrey, this is tens of thousands. She held up one page, her fingers trembling slightly. $75,000 gone? Yup, I said, leaning back. And that's only what I can prove so far. I also caught a transfer for $150,000 labeled as business development, but it landed in a private account with Dad's name on it. I lowered my voice and leaned in. If I hadn't pulled out when I did, I'd be financially liable for all of it. She stared at the folder like it might bite her. You have to talk to him, she said, her voice cracking. There's gotta be an explanation. Dad's made mistakes, sure, but he's not a thief. I clenched my jaw. I did talk to him, Em. You know what he gave me? A voicemail. 7 words. That's how he ended this family. Her eyes dropped to the table, glassy with tears. I felt something twist inside me, guilt maybe, but I pushed it down. I'd already made my move. Just don't blow it all up, she said softly. Mom's talking about selling the house. If this all comes out, I don't know what'll happen. I stood up and pulled a 20 from my wallet, tossing it on the table. I'm not the one who lit the match, I said. But I'll be damned if I don't see the fire through. As I turned to leave, she reached out and grabbed my sleeve. Please, she whispered. Just think about it. Her hand on my arm stopped me in my tracks. For a second, I was back in our childhood bedroom, her tiny frame curled up next to me during a storm, clutching my shirt like the world was ending. I looked down, nodded once, and walked out. The doorbell chimed behind me like a punctuation mark. That evening, I got a notification from the bank. The account freeze had gone through. They'd flagged over $250,000 in suspect transactions, and there were still more funds pending transfer. I imagined Dad in his office, eyes wide, watching the money dry up like a river in a drought. His kingdom was collapsing and fast. I wasn't just stepping away anymore. I was torching the whole damn thing. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating nonstop. My inbox was bursting, messages from the bank, notes from my lawyer, and a string of increasingly frantic emails from my dad's accountant. The audit had started earlier than I expected, and it was shaking loose every hidden corner of Dad's empire. The avalanche had begun, and I wasn't about to dig anyone out. I was scrolling through the latest updates from the bank when the real weight of it hit me, over $400,000 in assets frozen across multiple accounts. On top of that, they'd flagged another $200,000 in unexplained withdrawals from just the past 6 months. It was a financial chokehold. The kind you don't recover from. The kind that could bring the whole business to its knees. About an hour later, Angela called. I stared at her name on the screen for a second, then sighed and picked up. "Jeffrey," she said, her voice tight and trembling. "What did you do?" I kept my voice calm. "I did what had to be done. They tried to shove me out without warning. I just made sure they couldn't pull it off clean." "They're in full-blown panic mode," she said, her voice cracking. "Dad's ranting about lawyers. He's saying this is sabotage. Mom hasn't stopped crying since yesterday. It's getting out of control." I leaned back in my chair. I hadn't expected the panic to hit this hard, this fast. But then again, my parents had never been great at handling blowback. I gave them a chance. Dad played his hand and I responded. "I'm not backing down." There was a pause, long, tense, filled with her shaky breathing on the other end. I could practically see her standing there, white-knuckling her phone, fighting the urge to scream or cry. "Please," she said finally. "Just meet with them. One last time. If not for them, then for me." I closed my eyes for a second. Angela had always been the one who tried to hold this mess together, the bridge between explosive personalities and years of resentment. I owed her something. At least this. "Okay," I said. "But this is it. One meeting. That's all." That evening, I drove to the house I grew up in. It looked exactly the same, tidy lawn, perfect hedges, the front steps scrubbed so clean they practically sparkled. But to me, the place had always felt more like a museum than a home, carefully curated but hollow. Mom opened the door. Her eyes were swollen and glassy. She pulled me into a hug that felt more like a plea than a welcome. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. Inside, Dad was pacing the living room like a caged animal. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscles twitching. The air in the room was thick, not just with tension, but with the kind of resentment that had been building for years and was finally cracking the surface. "Sit down," he barked, without even looking at me. I dropped into one of the stiff leather chairs, my eyes drifting to the family photos on the wall. Years of forced smiles and hollow moments captured in glossy frames. "So?" I said, leaning back. "What is this, a negotiation or an ambush?" He spun around, red-faced and fuming. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Jeffrey? You freeze the accounts? Start an audit? You're tearing this family apart." I felt heat rise in my chest. "You did that the minute you tried to erase me. You thought I wouldn't notice $250,000 disappearing into some hidden account? You figured I'd just shrug and walk away." Mom winced like my words physically hurt. She covered her mouth with one hand and looked like she wanted to disappear. Dad's eyes narrowed and his voice dropped into something cold and dangerous. "You don't understand the damage you've done. I had deals in place. Investments lined up. Freezing those accounts could ruin everything we built." I shook my head. "We didn't build anything. I did my part and you tried to cut me out like dead weight. Now you're just upset I didn't let it slide." Silence settled over the room like a fog. The only sound was the low hum of the fridge in the kitchen, quiet, mechanical, and weirdly loud in that heavy moment. Then Dad stepped closer, his voice low and sharp. "All right," he said. "You want to fight? You want to burn the whole thing down? Fine. Let's see how far you're willing to go." For the first time, a chill crept down my spine. Something about his tone was different, darker, meaner. But I held his gaze. I wasn't walking away now. Angela rushed in between us, arms out like a human shield. "Stop it. Both of you. This isn't getting us anywhere." I grabbed my jacket and stood. "I came because you asked me to, Em. But I'm done talking." He made his choice. As I turned to leave, I heard Mom quietly sobbing behind me. I paused at the door for half a second, but I didn't look back. I just pulled it shut behind me hard. When I got to the car, my phone buzzed. A new email from my lawyer. I opened it and let out a bitter laugh. My parents had filed a lawsuit. They were accusing me of corporate sabotage, saying I'd illegally taken over their accounts and damaged the business. It was insane, but it was real. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and stared at the ceiling of my car for a moment, letting the silence settle in. So that's how they wanted to play it. Fine. I tried to give them an exit. Now I'd make sure they didn't have a leg left to stand on. The lawsuit hit harder than I expected. Dad had gone full scorched earth. The claims were wild: embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, you name it. He was throwing everything at the wall and hoping something stuck. My lawyer and I spent the next week drowning in paperwork, drafting counters, digging up receipts. The tension was constant. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched. Emails from the court, motions from their legal team, a subpoena for financial records I hadn't even thought about in years. Then they pulled Angela into it. They named her as a witness, probably hoping she'd side with them and twist the knife. It stung, even though I couldn't really blame her. She was caught in the middle, trying to keep a sinking ship from snapping in half. 2 days before our first court date, something unexpected happened. I got an email from Dad's accountant, the same guy who'd left that furious voicemail weeks ago. Only now his tone had changed. It was nervous, hesitant, almost scared. "Jeffrey, we need to meet. Privately. There are things you don't know." I agreed cautiously. We met at a quiet dive bar just outside town. He was already there when I walked in, nursing a half-empty glass of whiskey. The guy looked like hell, suit rumpled, tie undone, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in days. He waved me over, his eyes darting nervously around the room like someone might be watching. "Jeffrey," he said, voice low and shaky. "I shouldn't be here. If they find out." "Calm down," I said, sliding into the booth. "Just tell me what you've got." He leaned forward, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. He leaned in close, his voice a low whisper like he was afraid the walls might be listening. "Your father's been hiding money for years. I'm talking offshore accounts, dummy corporations, cash deals that never touched a ledger. At first, I figured it was just clever tax dodging, but it's worse than that. Way worse." A chill crept up my spine. I'd expected maybe some sketchy bookkeeping, some creative write-offs. But this sounded like something out of a crime novel. His hand trembled as he slid a flash drive across the table. I thought for a second he was going to spill his drink. "It's all on there. Wire transfers, ghost invoices, shady contracts, enough to ruin him 10 times over." I picked up the drive and tucked it into my pocket. My thoughts were already spinning. If even half of what he said was legit, this wasn't just a legal defense, this was a weapon. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked, eyeing him across the table. He knocked back the rest of his whiskey and finally looked me dead in the eye. "Because I'm not going down with him. I've got a wife, a kid in college. I'm not losing everything because your father thought he was untouchable." That night, I stayed up late in my office, the only light coming from my computer screen. I opened the files on the drive and started digging. What I found was worse than I imagined: years of buried evidence. Falsified invoices, money funneled into fake companies, huge international transfers marked as consulting fees. Over $750,000 had been siphoned straight out of the business and into accounts only my father could access. All of it under his name. By morning, I had one simple message from my attorney. "Let's finish this." When our court date rolled around, my parents were backed into a corner. Their assets were frozen, their reputation wrecked, and now they were staring down the possibility of federal charges. The judge barely needed an hour. The evidence spoke for itself. Case dismissed. The court also ordered a full forensic audit of their finances. The look on my father's face as the reality hit him, as everything he tried to build came crashing down, it was something I'll never forget. Mom looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. She barely met my eyes. A week later, Angela called. She'd found them a small, rundown apartment on the far edge of town, a far cry from the mansion they once treated like a trophy. She didn't ask me for help. She never would. But I quietly covered a few months' rent, more for her than for them. Shortly after that, I signed the papers to officially dissolve the family business, the last tie binding us together. That chapter was closed. My dad used to say, "Don't mix family with business." He wasn't wrong. Angela still checks in. Every couple of weeks, she'll call just to chat, to see how I'm doing, careful never to bring up our parents. She still holds on to this hope that somehow, someday, we'll all sit down and sort it out. That there's still a version of this family left to salvage. And maybe she's right. Maybe one day I'll listen to whatever explanation they've got waiting. Maybe I'll find a way to let them back in just enough so Angela doesn't feel stuck choosing between us. But not yet. Right now, I'm okay with the silence. They're left with each other and nothing else. A few months went by. Things quieted down. The dust settled. They're still in that cramped apartment. Angela tells me they're struggling. The legal fees drained whatever savings they had left. Dad's pride has taken a beating. Mom barely leaves the place. Last week, Angela called again. I could hear the hesitation in her voice. They want to see you, she said. They're trying, Jeffrey. Trying to make things right. I didn't say anything at first. Just sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, letting her words hang heavy in the air. I knew she'd carried the weight of all this, helped them move, paid bills when everything froze. She was the only one who'd never given up on the idea that this family could be fixed. Okay, I said eventually. I'll come. Yesterday I drove over. Parked in a cracked lot outside their new place. The building looked tired, peeling paint, rusted stair railings, that lingering smell of something fried and forgotten. I stood at the door for a while, just staring at it, remembering the last time I saw them. Remembering how we'd left things. When the door opened, I barely recognized my father. He looked smaller somehow. Shrunken. His back hunched, hair thinner, eyes dull. Behind him, my mother looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. She stepped forward and pulled me into a hug, her voice a soft whisper. Thank you for coming. We sat in their cluttered little living room, cheap furniture, walls lined with old boxes, a far cry from the glossy home they used to take pride in. There were long pauses between their words. Like they were trying to remember how to speak to me without barking orders. We made mistakes, my dad finally said, staring down at his hands. We thought we were protecting the family. That we could fix it before anyone noticed. But we went too far. I sat there listening. My face blank, my heart confused, caught somewhere between anger and that old ache you feel when someone lets you down but still matters to you. Then Mom reached out, her hand shaking as it found mine. Please, Jeffrey. Let's start over. I didn't say yes. I didn't forgive them. I didn't make any promises. I just nodded, stood up, and left. Now here I am, sitting at my desk, watching the cursor blink like it's waiting for something I haven't quite figured out yet. I keep wondering if I made the right call. Maybe I should have walked away for good and let them live in the fallout they created. But maybe, just maybe, some broken things are still worth trying to fix. So, Reddit. Did I do the right thing?